Hello and welcome to the final 3 chapters from It Shouldn't Happen to a Vet by James Herriot. These are chapters 31, 32 and 33. There is an afterword by Carol Drinkwater, the original Helen, in the TV series, the original TV series, All Creatures Great and Small. But I shan't read that. I shall read that privately. So, we begin with chapter 31. Tristan was unpacking the UCMs. These bottles contained a rich red fluid which constituted our last line of defence in the battle with animal disease. Its full name, Universal Cattle Medicine, was proclaimed on the label in big black type, and underneath it pointed out that it was highly efficacious for coughs, chills, scours, garget, milk fever, pneumonia, felon and bloat. It finished off on a confident note with the assurance, never fails to give relief, and we had read the label so often that we half believed it. It was a pity it didn't do any good, because there was something compelling about its ruby depths when you held it up to the light, and about the solid camphor ammonia jolt when you sniffed at it, and which made the farmers blink and shake their heads and say, "By God, that's powerful stuff," with deep respect. But our specific remedies were so few, and the possibilities of error so plentiful, that it was comforting, in cases of doubt, to be able to hand over a bottle of the old standby. Whenever an entry of Siegfried's or mine appeared in the day book, stating, "Visit, attend, cow, advice, IUCM," it was a pretty fair bet we didn't know what was wrong with the animal. The bottles were tall and shapely, and they came in elegant white cartons, so much more impressive than the unobtrusive containers of the antibiotics and steroids which we use today. Tristan was lifting them out of the tea chest and stacking them on the shelves in deep rows. When he saw me, he ceased his labours, sat on the chest and pulled out a packet of woodbines. He lit one, pulled the smoke a long way down, then fixed me with a non-committal stare. "You're taking her to the pictures, then?" Feeling vaguely uneasy under his eye, I tipped a pocketful of assorted empties into the wastebasket. "Yes, that's right. In about an hour." He narrowed his eyes against the slowly escaping smoke. I see. "Well, what are you looking like that for?" I said defensively. "Anything wrong with going to the pictures?" No, nothing at all, Jim. Nothing. A very wholesome pursuit. But you don't think I should be taking Helen there?" "I never said that. No, I'm sure you'll have a nice time. It's just that—" he scratched his head. "I thought you might have gone in for something a bit more, enterprising." I gave a bitter laugh. "Look, I tried enterprise at the Reniston. Oh, I'm not blaming you, Tris. You meant well, but as you know, it was a complete shambles. I just don't want anything to go wrong tonight. I'm playing safe." "Well, I won't argue with you there," Tristan said. "You couldn't get much safer than the Darrowby Plaza." And later, shivering in the tub in the vast draughty bathroom, I couldn't keep out the thought that Tristan was right. Taking Helen to the local cinema was a form of cowardice, a shrinking away from reality into what I hoped would be a safe, dark intimacy. But as I towelled myself, hopping about to keep warm, and looked out through the fringe of wisteria at the darkening garden, there was comfort in the thought that it was another beginning, even though a small one. And as I closed the door of Skeldale House and looked along the street to where the first lights of the shops beckoned in the dusk, I felt a lifting of the heart. It was as though a breath from the nearby hills had touched me, a fleeting fragrance which said winter had gone. It was still cold. It was always cold in Darrowby until well into May, but the promise was there of sunshine and warm grass and softer days. You had to look closely, or you could easily miss the plaza, tucked in as it was between Pickersgills, the ironmongers, and Howarths, the chemists. There had never been much attempt at grandeur in its architecture, and the entrance was hardly wider than the average shop front. But what puzzled me as I approached was that the place was in darkness. I was in good time, but the show was due to start in 10 minutes or so, and there was no sign of life. I hadn't dared tell Tristan that my precautions had extended as far as arranging to meet Helen here. With a car like mine, there was always an element of doubt about arriving anywhere in time, or indeed at all, and I had thought it prudent to eliminate all transport hazards. Meet you outside the cinema? My God, it wasn't very bright, was it? It took me back to my childhood, to the very first time I'd taken a girl out. I was just 14, and on my way to meet her, I tendered my only half-crown to a bloody-minded Glasgow tram conductor and asked for a penny fare. He vented his spleen on me by ransacking his bag and giving me my change entirely in halfpence. So when the cinema queue reached the pay box, I had to stand there with my little partner and everybody else watching while I paid for our shilling tickets with great handfuls of copper. The shame of it left a scar. It was another 4 years before I took out a girl again. But the black thoughts were dispelled when I saw Helen picking her way across the marketplace cobbles. She smiled and waved cheerfully as if being taken to the Darrowby Plaza was the biggest treat a girl could wish for. And when she came right up to me, there was a soft flush on her cheeks and her eyes were bright. Everything was suddenly absolutely right. I felt a surging conviction that this was going to be a good night. Nothing was going to spoil it. After we had said hello, she told me that Dan was running about like a puppy, with no trace of a limp, and the news was another wave on the high tide of my euphoria. The only thing that troubled me was the black, uninhabited appearance of the cinema entrance. "Strange there's nobody here," I said. "It's nearly starting time. I suppose the place is open." "Must be," Helen said. "It's open every night but Sunday. Anyway, I'm sure these people are waiting too." I looked around. There was no queue as such, but little groups were standing here and there. A few couples, mostly middle-aged, a bunch of small boys rolling and fighting on the pavement. Nobody seemed worried. And indeed there was no cause. Exactly 2 minutes before the picture was due to start, a figure in a mackintosh coat pedalled furiously round the corner of the street, head down, legs pistoning, the bicycle lying over at a perilous angle with the ground. He came to a screeching halt outside the entrance, inserted a key in the lock, and threw wide the doors. Reaching inside, he flicked a switch, and a single neon strip flickered fitfully above our heads and went out. It did this a few times and seemed bent on mischief till he stood on tiptoe and beat it into submission with a masterful blow of his fist. Then he whipped off the mackintosh, revealing faultless evening dress. The manager had arrived. While this was going on, a very fat lady appeared from nowhere and wedged herself into the pay box. The show was ready to roll. We all began to shuffle inside. The little boys put down their ninepences and punched each other as they passed through a curtain into the stalls, while the rest of us proceeded decorously upstairs to the 1 and 6penny seats in the balcony. The manager, his white shirt front and silk lapels gleaming, smiled and bowed with great courtesy as we passed. We paused at a row of pegs at the top of the stairs, while some people hung up their coats. I was surprised to see Maggie Robinson, the blacksmith's daughter, there, taking the tickets, and she appeared to be intrigued by the sight of us. She simpered and giggled, darted glances at Helen, and did everything but dig me in the ribs. Finally she parted the curtains and we went inside. It struck me immediately that the management were determined that their patrons wouldn't feel cold, because if it hadn't been for the all-pervading smell of old sofas, we might have been plunging into a tropical jungle. Maggie steered us through the stifling heat to our places, and as I sat down I noticed that there was no arm between the two seats. "Them's the courting seats," she blurted out, and fled with her hand to her mouth. The lights were still on, and I looked round the tiny balcony. There were only about a dozen people, dotted here and there, sitting in patient silence under the plain distempered walls. By the side of the screen, the hands of a clock stood resolutely at 4:20. But it was all right sitting there with Helen. I felt fine except for a tendency to gasp like a goldfish in the airless atmosphere. I was settling down cosily when a little man seated in front of us with his wife turned slowly round. The mouth in the haggard face was pursed grimly, and he fixed his eyes on mine in a long, challenging stare. We faced each other for several silent moments before he finally spoke. "She's dead," he said. A thrill of horror shot through me. "Dead? Aye, she is. She's dead." He dragged the word out slowly with a kind of mournful satisfaction while his eyes still stared into mine. I swallowed a couple of times. "Well, I'm sorry to hear that. Truly sorry." He nodded grimly and continued to regard me with a peculiar intensity, as though he expected me to say more. Then, with apparent reluctance, he turned away and settled in his seat. I looked helplessly at the rigid back, at the square, narrow shoulders muffled in a heavy overcoat. Who in God's name was this? And what was he talking about? I knew the face from somewhere. Must be a client. And what was dead? Cow? Ewe? So? My mind began to race over the cases I had seen during the past week, but that face didn't seem to fit in anywhere. Helen was looking at me questioningly, and I managed a wan smile, but the spell was shattered. I started to say something to her when the little man began to turn again with menacing deliberation. He fixed me once more with a hostile glare. "I don't think there was ever aught wrong with her stomach," he declared. You don't, eh?" "No, young man, I don't." He dragged his eyes unwillingly from my face and turned towards the screen again. The effect of this second attack was heightened because the lights went off suddenly and an incredible explosion of noise blasted my eardrums. It was the Gaumont News. The sound machine, like the heating system, had apparently been designed for something like the Albert Hall, and for a moment I cowered back under the assault. As a voice bellowed details of fortnight-old events, I closed my eyes and tried again to place the man in front of me. I often had trouble identifying people outside their usual environment, and had once discussed the problem with Siegfried. He had been airy. "There's an easy way, James. Just ask them how they spell their names. You'll have no trouble at all." I had tried this on one occasion, and the farmer had looked at me strangely, replied "Smrth," and hurried away. So there seemed nothing to do now but sit sweating with my eyes on the disapproving back and search through my memory. When the news finished with a raucous burst of music, I had got back about 3 weeks without result. There was a blessed respite of a few seconds before the uproar broke out again. This was the main feature. The film about Scotland was on later, and was described outside as a tender love story. I can't remember the title, but there was a lot of embracing which would have been all right, except that every kiss was accompanied by a chorus of long-drawn sucking noises from the little boys downstairs. The less romantic blue raspberries, pardon me. And all the time it got hotter. I opened my jacket wide and unbuttoned my shirt collar, but I was beginning to feel decidedly light-headed. The little man in front, still huddled in his heavy coat, seemed unperturbed. Twice the projector broke down, and we stared for several minutes at a blank screen while a storm of whistling and stamping came up from the stalls. Maggie Robinson, standing in the dim light by the curtains, still appeared to be fascinated by the sight of Helen and me. Whenever I looked up, I found her eyes fixed upon us with a knowing leer. About halfway through the film, however, her concentration was disturbed by a commotion on the other side of the curtain, and she was suddenly brushed aside as a large form burst through. With a feeling of disbelief, I recognised Gobber Newhouse. I had had previous experience of his disregard of the licensing laws, and it was clear he had been at it again. He spent most afternoons in the back rooms of the local pubs, and here he was, come to relax after a rough session. He reeled up the aisle, turned, to my dismay, into our row, rested briefly on Helen's lap, trod on my toe, and finally spread his enormous carcass over the seat on my left. Fortunately, it was another courting seat with no central arm to get in his way, but for all that he had great difficulty in finding a comfortable position. He heaved and squirmed about, and the wheezing and snuffling and grunting in the darkness might have come from a pen of bacon picks. But at last he found a spot, and with a final cavernous belch, composed himself for slumber. The tender love story never did have much of a chance, but Gobber sounded its death knell. With his snores reverberating in my ear, and a dense pall of stale beer drifting over me, I was unable to appreciate any of the delicate nuances. It was a relief when the last close-up came to an end and the lights went up. I was a bit worried about Helen. I had noticed as the evening wore on that her lips had a tendency to twitch occasionally, and now and then she drew her brows down in a deep frown. I wondered if she was upset, but Maggie appeared providentially with a tray round her neck and stood over us, still leering, while I purchased 2 chocolate ices. I had taken only 1 bite when I noticed a stirring under the overcoat in front of me. The little man was returning to the attack. The eyes staring from the grim mask were as chilling as ever. "I knew," he said, "right from start that you were on the wrong track." "Is that so?" "Aye. I've been among beasts for 50 years, and they never go on like that when it's the stomach." "Don't they? You're probably right." The little man twisted higher in his seat, and for a moment I thought he was going to climb over at me. He raised a forefinger. "For one thing, a beast with a bad stomach is always hard in its muck." "I see. And if you think back, this one's muck was soft, real soft." Yes, quite," I said, hastily glancing across at Helen. This was great, just what I needed to complete the romantic atmosphere. He sniffed and turned away, and once again, as if the whole thing had been stage-managed, we were plunged into blackness, and the noise blasted out again. I was lying back quivering when it came through to me that something was wrong. What was this strident Western music? Then the title flashed on the screen, Arizona Guns. I turned to Helen in alarm. "What's going on? This is supposed to be the Scottish film, isn't it? The one we came to see." "It's supposed to be." Helen paused and looked at me with a half-smile. "But I'm afraid it isn't going to be. The thing is, they often change the supporting film without warning. Nobody seems to mind." I slumped wearily in my seat. Well, I'd done it again. No dance at the Reniston. Wrong picture tonight. I was a genius in my own way. "I'm sorry," I said. "I hope you don't mind too much." She shook her head. "Not a bit. Anyway, let's give this one a chance. It may be all right." But as the ancient horse opera crackled out its cliché-ridden message, I gave up hope. This was going to be another of those evenings I watched apathetically as the posse galloped for the 4th time past the same piece of rock, and I was totally unprepared for the deafening fusillade of shots which rang out. It made me jump, and it even roused Gobber from his sleep. Hello, he bawled, jerking upright and thrashing around him with his arms. A backhander on the side of the head drove me violently against Helen's shoulder, and I was beginning to apologise when I saw that her twitching and frowning had come on again. But this time it spread, and her whole face seemed to break up. She began to laugh silently and helplessly. I had never seen a girl like this. It was as though it was something she had wanted to do for a long time. She abandoned herself utterly to it, lying back with her head on the back of the seat, legs stretched out in front of her, arms dangling by her side. She took her time and waited until she had got it all out of her system before she turned to me. She put her hand on my arm. "Look," she said faintly, "next time, why don't we just go for a walk?" I settled down. Gobber was asleep again, and his snores, louder than ever, competed with the bangs and howls from the screen. I still hadn't the slightest idea who that little man in front could be, and I had the feeling he wasn't finished with me yet. The clock still stood at 4:20. Maggie was still staring at us, and a steady trickle of sweat ran down my back. The environment wasn't all I could have desired, but never mind, there was going to be a next time. Chapter 32. Siegfried had a habit of pulling at the lobe of his ear and staring blankly ahead when preoccupied. He was doing it now, his other hand outstretched, crumbling a crust of bread on his plate. I didn't usually pry into my boss's meditations. And anyway, I wanted to be off on the morning round, but there was something portentous in his face which made me speak. What's the matter? Something on your mind? Siegfried turned his head slowly, and his eyes glared sightlessly for a few moments until recognition dawned. He stopped his load pulling, got to his feet, walked over to the window and looked out at the empty street. There is, James, there is indeed. In fact, I was just about to ask your advice. It's about this letter I got this morning. He ransacked his pockets impatiently, pulling out handkerchiefs, thermometers, crumpled banknotes, lists of calls, till he found a long blue envelope. Here, read it. I opened the envelope and quickly scanned a single sheet. I looked up puzzled. Sorry, I don't get it. All it says here is that H.W. St. John Ransom, Major General, would like the pleasure of your company at Broughton Races on Saturday. No problem there, is there? You like racing. Ah, but it's not so simple as that, Siegfried said, starting again on the lobe. This is in the nature of a trial. General Ransom is one of the big boys in the Northwest racing circuit, and he's bringing one of his pals along on Saturday to vet me. They're going to examine me for soundness. I must have looked alarmed because he grinned. Look, I'd better start at the beginning, and I'll cut it short. The officials of the Northwest Circuit are looking for a veterinary surgeon to supervise all meetings. You know the local man attends if there's a race course in his town, and he is on call in case of injury to the horses, but this would be different. The supervisory vet would deal with cases of suspected doping and the like. In fact, he'd have to be a bit of a specialist. Well, I've had a whisper that they think I might be the man for the job, and that's what Saturday's about. I know old Ransom, but I haven't met his colleague. The idea is to have a day at the races with me and size me up. If you got the job, would it mean giving up general practice? I asked, and a chill wind seemed to creep around me at the idea. No, but it would mean spending something like 3 days a week on race courses, and I'm wondering if that wouldn't be just a bit much. Well, I don't know. I finished my coffee and pushed back my chair. I'm not really the one to advise you on this. I haven't had a lot of experience with racehorses, and I'm not interested in racing. You'll have to make up your own mind. But you've often talked of specialising in horsework, and you love the atmosphere of a racecourse. You're right there, James. I do. And there's no doubt the extra money would come in very useful. It's what every practice needs. A contract of some sort. A regular income from somewhere to make you less dependent on the farmers paying their bills. He turned away from the window. Anyway, I'll go to Broughton Races with them on Saturday, and we'll see how it turns out. And you must come too. Me? Why? Well, it says in the letter, and partner. That means some woman. They'll have their wives with them, no doubt. Doesn't matter what it means, James. You're coming with me. A day out and a bit of free food and booze will do you good. Tristan can hold the fort for a few hours. It was nearly noon on Saturday when I answered the doorbell. As I walked along the passage, it was easy to identify the people beyond the glass door. General Ransom was short and square, with a moustache of surprising blackness thrusting aggressively from his upper lip. Colonel Tremaine was tall, hawk-nosed and stooping, but he shared with his companion the almost tangible aura of authority which comes from a lifetime of command. 2 tweedy women stood behind them on the lower step. I opened the door, feeling my shoulders squaring and my heels coming together under the battery of fierce, unsmiling glares. "Mr. Farnan," barked the General, "expecting us, I think." I retreated a pace and opened the door. "Oh, yes, certainly. Please come in." The 2 women swept in first. Mrs. Ransom, as squat and chunky, and even tougher looking than her husband. Then Mrs. Tremaine, much younger and attractive in a hard-boiled fashion. All of them completely ignored me except the Colonel, who brought up the rear and fixed me for a moment with a fishy eye. I had been instructed to dispense sherry, and once inside the sitting-room I began to pour from a decanter. I was halfway up the second glass when Siegfried walked in. I spilt some of the sherry. My boss had really spruced up for the occasion. His lean frame was draped in cavalry twill of flawless cut. The long, strong-boned face was freshly shaven, the small, sandy moustache neatly clipped. He swept off a brand-new bowler as he came in, and I put down my decanter and gazed at him with proprietary pride. Maybe there had been a few dukes or the odd earl in Siegfried's family tree, but as it may, the two army men seemed in an instant to have become low-bred and a trifle scruffy. There was something almost ingratiating in the way the general went up to Siegfried. "Farnan, me dear fella, how are you? Good to see you again. Let me introduce you to me wife, Mrs. Tremaine, Colonel Tremaine." The colonel astonishingly dug up a twisted smile, but my main interest was in the reaction of the ladies. Mrs. Ransom, looking up at Siegfried as he bent over her, just went to pieces. It was unbelievable that this formidable fortress should crumble at the first shot, but there it was. The tough lines melted from her face, and she was left with a big sloppy smile, looking like anybody's dear old mum. Mrs. Tremaine's response was different, but no less dramatic. As the steady grey eyes swept her, she seemed to wither, and it was as if a spasm of exquisite pain twisted her cheeks. She controlled herself with an effort, but looked after Siegfried with wistful hunger as he turned back to the men. I began to slosh the sherry violently into the glasses. Damn it, there it was again, the same old thing. And yet he didn't do anything, just looked at them. Hell, it wasn't fair. Sherry over, we moved outside and installed ourselves in Siegfried's Rover, on which an immaculate coach-building job had been done since the disaster of last summer. It was an impressive turnout. The car, after a morning's forced labour by Tristan with hose and lever, shone like a mirror. Siegfried, in the driver's seat, extended an elegant arm to his brother as we drove away. I couldn't help feeling that the only superfluous object was myself, squatting uncomfortably on a little let-down seat, facing the two army men, who sat to attention in the back seat, their bowlers pointing rigidly to the front. Between them, Mrs. Tremaine stared wonderingly at the back of Siegfried's head. We lunched on the course, Siegfried comfortably at home with the smoked salmon, the cold chicken and the champagne. There was no doubt he had scored a tremendous success during the meal, discussing racing knowledgeably with the men and dispensing charm equally to their wives. The tough Mrs. Ransom positively simpered as he marked her card for her. It was quite certain that if the new appointment hung upon his behaviour today, a vote at this time would have seen him home and dry. After lunch we went down to the paddock and had a look at the horses parading for the first race. I could see Siegfried expanding as he took in the scene, the jostling crowds, the shouting bookies, the beautiful animals pacing round, the jockeys, tiny, colourful, durable, chatting to the trainers out in the middle. He had got through enough champagne at lunch to sharpen his appreciation, and he was the very picture of a man who just knew he was going to have a successful day. Merryweather, the course vet, joined us to watch the first race. Siegfried knew him slightly, and they were chatting after the race when the vet wanted sign went up. A man hurried up to Merryweather. "That horse that slipped at the last bend is still down and doesn't look like getting up." The vet started for his car, which was parked in readiness near the rails. He turned towards us. "You two want to come?" Siegfried looked inquiringly at his party and received gracious nods of assent. We hurried after our colleague. Within seconds we were racing down the course towards the last bend. Merryweather, hanging on to the wheel as we sped over the grass, grunted half to himself, "Hell, I hope this thing hasn't got a fracture. If there's one thing I mortally hate, it's shooting horses." It didn't look good when we got to the spot. The sleek animal lay flat on its side, showing no movement apart from the laboured rise and fall of its ribs. The jockey, blood streaming from a cut brow, knelt by its head. "What do you think, sir? Has he broken a leg?" "Let's have a look." Merryweather began to palpate the extended limbs, running strong fingers over one bone, then another, carefully flexing the joints of fetlock, knee, shoulder, hock. Nothing wrong there. Certainly no fracture. Then he pointed suddenly at the head. Look at his eyes. We looked. They were glazed, and there was a slight but unmistakable nystagmus. Concussion, Siegfried said. That's it. He's just had a bang on the head. Merryweather got off his knees, looking happier. Come on, we'll push him onto his chest. I think he ought to be able to get up with a bit of help. There were plenty of helpers from the crowd, and the horse was rolled easily till he rested on his sternum, 4 legs extended forward. After a couple of minutes in this position, he struggled to his feet and stood swaying slightly. A stable lad walked him away. Merryweather laughed. Well, that wasn't so bad. Good horse, that. I think he'll be all right after a rest. Siegfried had started to reply when we heard a psst, psst from beyond the rails. We looked up and saw a stout, red-faced figure gesturing at us eagerly. Hey, hey, it was saying, come over here a minute. We went over. There was something about the face which Siegfried seemed to find intriguing. He looked closer at the grinning, pudgy features, the locks of oily black hair falling over the brow, and cried out in delight. God help us, Stewie Brannan! Here, James, come and meet another colleague. We came through college together. Siegfried had told me a lot about Stewie Brannan, so much, in fact, that I seemed to be shaking hands with an old, well-remembered friend. Sometimes, when the mood was on us, Siegfried and I would sit up nearly till dawn, over a bottle in the big room at Skeldale House, chewing over old times and recalling the colourful characters we had known. I remembered he had told me he had overtaken Stewie about halfway through the course, and had qualified while Stewie was still battling in his 3rd year. Siegfried had described him as totally unambitious, averse to study, disinclined to wash or shave, in fact his idea of the young man least likely to succeed. But there had been something touching about him, the ingenuousness of a child, a huge, all-embracing affection for his fellow humans, an impregnable cheerfulness. Siegfried called over to Merryweather. Will you give my apologies to my friends when you go back? There's a chap here I have to see. I'll only be a few minutes. Merryweather waved, got into his car, and drove back up the course as we ducked under the rails. Siegfried seized the bulky figure by the arm. Come on, Stewie. Where can we get a drink? Chapter 33, the last chapter. We went into a long, low bar under the stand, and I experienced a slight shock of surprise. This was the 4 and 6-penny end, and the amenities were rather different from the paddock. The eating and drinking was done mainly in the vertical position, and the cuisine seemed to consist largely of pies and sausage rolls. Siegfried fought his way to the bar and collected 3 whiskies. We sat down at one of the few available tables, an unstable metal-top structure. At the next table a sharp-faced character studied the pink 'un, while he took great swigs at a pint and tore savagely at a pork pie. Now, my lad, Siegfried said, what have you been doing for the past 6 years? Well, let's see, said Stewie, absently downing his whisky at a gulp. I got into finals shortly after you left, and I didn't do so bad at all, really. Pipped them both first go, then I had a bit of bother with surgery a couple of times, but I was launched on the unsuspecting animal population 4 years ago. I've been around quite a lot since then, north, south, even 6 months in Ireland. I've been trying to find a place with a living wage. This 3 or 4 quid a week lark isn't much cut when you have a family to keep. Family? You're married then? Not half. You remember little Meg Hamilton? I used to bring her to the college dances. We got married when I got into final year. We've got 5 kids now and another on the way. Siegfried choked on his whisky. 5 kids? For God's sake, Stewie! Ah, it's wonderful, really, Siegfried. You probably wonder how we managed to exist. Well, I couldn't tell you. I don't know myself. But we've kept one jump ahead of ruin, and we've been happy too. I think we're going to be okay now. I stuck up my plate in Hensfield a few months ago, and I'm doing all right. Been able to clear the housekeeping, and that's all that matters. Hensfield, eh? Siegfried said. I pictured the grim West Riding town, a wilderness of decaying brick bristling with factory chimneys. It was the other Yorkshire. Mainly small animal, I suppose. Oh, yes, I earn my daily bread almost entirely by separating the local tomcats from their knackers. Thanks to me, the feline females of Hensfield can walk the streets unmolested. Siegfried laughed and caught the only waitress in the place lightly by the arm as she hurried by. She whipped round with a frown and an angry word, but took another look and smiled. Yes, sir? Siegfried looked into her face seriously for a few moments, still holding her arm. Then he spoke quietly. I wonder if you'd be kind enough to bring us 3 large whiskies, and keep repeating the order whenever you see our glasses are empty. Would you be able to do that? Certainly, sir, of course. The waitress was over 40, but she was blushing like a young girl. Stewie's chins quivered with silent laughter. You old bugger, Farnan, it does me good to see you haven't changed. Really? Well, that's rather nice, isn't it? And the funny thing is, I don't think you really try. Try? Try what? Ah, nothing. Forget it. Here's our whisky. As the drinks kept coming, they talked and talked. I didn't butt in. I sat listening, wrapped in a pleasant euphoria, and pushing every other glassful unobtrusively round to Stewie, who put it out of sight with a careless jerk of the wrist. As Siegfried sketched out his own progress, I was struck by the big man's total absence of envy. He was delighted to hear about the rise in practice, the pleasant house, the assistant. Siegfried had described him as plump in the old days, but he was fat now, despite his hard times. And I had heard about that overcoat. It was the navy nap which had been his only protection through the years at college. It couldn't have looked so good then, but it was a sad thing now, the seams strained to bursting by the bulging flesh. Look, Stewie, Siegfried fumbled uncomfortably with his glass, I'm sure you're going to do well at Hensfield, but if by some mischance things got a bit rough, I hope you wouldn't hesitate to turn to me. I'm not so far off in Darrowby, you know. In fact, he paused, swallowed, are you all right now? If a few quid would help, I've got 'em here. Stewie tossed back what must have been the 10th double whisky, and gazed at his old friend with gentle benevolence. You're a kind old bugger, Siegfried, but no thanks. As I said, we're clearing the housekeeping and we'll be okay. But I appreciate it. You always were kind. A strange old bugger, but kind. Strange? Siegfried was interested. No, not strange. Wrong word. Different. That's it. You were as different as hell. Different? Queried Siegfried, swallowing his whisky, as if it had stopped tasting of anything a long time ago. I'm sure you're wrong there, Stewie. Don't worry your head about it, Stewie said, and reached across the table to thump his friend on the shoulder. But his judgment was way out, and instead he swept Siegfried's bowler from his hat. It rolled to the feet of the man at the next table. During the conversation I had been aware of this gentleman, rushing out and trailing slowly back to resume his study of the pink 'un, and renew his attack on the food and drink. The man looked down at the hat. His face was a picture of misery and frustration born of too much beer, semi-masticated pork pies, and unwise investment. Convulsively he lashed out with a foot at the bowler and looked better immediately. The hat, deeply dented, soared back to Siegfried, who caught it and replaced it on his head with unruffled aplomb. He didn't seem in the least annoyed, apparently considered the man's reaction perfectly normal. We all stood up, and I was mildly surprised by a slight swaying and blurring of my surroundings. When things came to rest, I had another surprise. The big bar was nearly empty. The beer machines were hidden by white cloths. The barmaids were collecting the empty glasses. Stewie, Siegfried said, the meeting's over. Do you realise we've been nattering here for over 2 hours? And very nice too. Far better than giving the hard-earned coppers to the bookies. As Stewie rose to his feet, he clutched at the table and stood blinking for a few seconds. There's one thing, though, Siegfried said. My friends. I came here with a party, and they must be wondering where I've got to. Tell you what, come and meet them. They'll understand when they realise we haven't seen each other for years. We worked our way round to the paddock. No sign of the General and company. We finally found them in the car park, grouped unsmilingly around the Rover. Most of the other cars had gone. Siegfried strode up confidently, his dented bowler cocked at a jaunty angle. "I'm sorry to have left you, but a rather wonderful thing happened back there. I would like to present Mr. Stuart Brannan, a professional colleague and a very dear friend." 4 blank stares turned on Stewie. His big, meaty face was redder than ever, and he smiled sweetly through a faint dew of perspiration. I noticed that he had made a lopsided job of buttoning the navy nap overcoat. There was a spare buttonhole at the top, and a lack of alignment at the bottom. It made the straining, tortured garment look even more grotesque. The General nodded curtly. The Colonel appeared to be grinding his teeth. The ladies froze visibly and looked away. Yes, quite," grunted the General. "But we've been waiting here some time, and we want to be getting home." He stuck out his jaw and his moustache bristled. Siegfried waved a hand. Certainly, by all means. We'll leave right away." He turned to Stewie. "Well, goodbye for now, my lad. We'll get together again soon. I'll ring you." He began to feel through his pockets for his ignition key. He started quite slowly, but gradually stepped up his pace. After he had explored the pockets about 5 times, he stopped, closed his eyes, and appeared to give himself over to intense thought. Then, as though he had decided to do the thing systematically, he commenced to lay out the contents of his pockets one by one, using the car bonnet as a table. And as the pile grew, so did my conviction that doom was very near. It wasn't just the key that worried me. Siegfried had consumed a lot more whisky than I had, and with its usual delayed action, it had begun to creep up on him. He was swaying slightly, his dented bowler had slid forward over one eyebrow, and he kept dropping things as he pulled them from his pocket and examined them owlishly. A man with a long brush and a handcart was walking slowly across the car park when Siegfried grabbed his arm. "Look, I want you to do something for me. Here's 5 bob." "Right, mister." The man pocketed the money. "What do you want me to do?" "Find my car key." The man began to peer round Siegfried's feet. "I'll do me best. Dropped it round here, did you?" No, I've no idea where I dropped it." Siegfried waved vaguely. "It's somewhere on the course." The man looked blank for a moment, then he gazed out over the acres of littered ground, the carpet of discarded race cards, torn up tickets. He turned back to Siegfried and giggled suddenly. Then he walked away, still giggling. I stole a glance at our companions. They had watched the search in stony silence, and none of them seemed to be amused. The General was the first to explode. "Great heavens, Farnan, have you got the blasted key or haven't you? If the damn thing's lost, then we'd better make other arrangements. Can't keep the ladies standing around here." A gentle cough sounded in the background. Stewie was still there. He shambled forward and whispered in his friend's ear, and after a moment Siegfried wrung his hand fervently. "By God, Stewie, that's kind of you. You've saved the situation." He turned back to the party. "There's nothing to worry about. Mr. Brannan has kindly offered to provide us with transport. He's gone to get his car from the other park." He pointed triumphantly at the shiny back of the bulging navy overcoat, navigating unsteadily through the gate. Siegfried did his best to keep a conversation going, but it was hard slogging. Nobody replied to any of his light sallies, and he stopped abruptly when he saw a look of rage and disbelief spread over the General's face. Stewie had come back. The car was a tiny Austin 7, dwarfed even further by the massive form in the driver's seat. I judged from the rusted maroon paintwork and cracked windows that it must be one of the very earliest models, a tourer whose hood had long since disintegrated and been replaced by a homemade canvas cover fastened to the twisted struts by innumerable loops of string. Stewie struggled out, dragged open the passenger door, and inclined his head with modest pride. He motioned towards a pile of sacks which lay on the bare boards, where the passenger seat should have been. There were no seats in the back either, only a couple of rough wooden boxes bearing coloured labels with the legend "Finest American Apples." From the boxes peeped a jumble of medicine bottles, stethoscopes, powders, syringe cases. "I thought," said Stewie, "if we put the sacks on top of the boxes—" The General didn't let him finish. "Damn it, is this supposed to be a joke?" His face was brick red and the veins on his neck were swelling dangerously. "Are you trying to insult me friend and ladies? You want horsewhipping for this afternoon's work, Farnan. That's what you want, horsewhipping." He was halted by a sudden roar from the Rover's engine. The Colonel, a man of resource as befitted his rank, had shorted the ignition. Fortunately, the doors were not locked. The ladies took their places in the back, with the Colonel and I slunk miserably onto my little seat. The General had regained control of himself. "Get in, I'll drive," he barked at Siegfried as though addressing an erring lance corporal. But Siegfried held up a restraining hand. "Just one moment," he slurred. "The windscreen is very dirty. I'll give it a rub for you." The ladies watched him silently as he weaved round to the back of the car and began to rummage in the boot. The love light had died from their eyes. I don't know why he took the trouble. Possibly it was because through the whisky mists he felt he must re-establish himself as a competent and helpful member of the party. But the effort fell flat. The effect was entirely spoiled. He was polishing the glass with a dead hen. It was a couple of weeks later, again at the breakfast table, that Siegfried, reading the morning paper with his third cup of coffee, called out to me, "Ah, I see Herbert Jarvis, MRCVS, one-time Captain RAVC, has been appointed to the North West Circuit as Supervisory Veterinary Surgeon. I know Jarvis. Nice chap. Just the man for the job." I looked across at my boss for some sign of disappointment or regret. I saw none. Siegfried put down his cup, wiped his lips on his napkin, and sighed contentedly. "You know, James, everything happens for the best. Old Stewie was sent by Providence or Heaven or anything you like. I was never meant to get that job, and I'd have been as miserable as hell if I had got it. Come on, lad. Let's get off into those hills."